welcome to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, Wize, and today's guest is one of the most sought after mental performance coaches in the world. He has worked with NFL teams, Olympic athletes, Fortune 500 executives, and even the FBI, helping them unlock their next level of performance. He isn't just a coach, he's a speaker, leadership consultant, ordained minister, and former chaplain, blended science, psychology, and spirituality into a coaching style that transforms lives. From the locker room to the boardroom, he's teaching champions how to think, focus, and thrive. Let's welcome to Stuck in My Mind, Gary Chupik. Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you for being a guest. I greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Hello from Seattle, Washington.
Oh, you're in Seattle. Oh, man. I'm all the way in Pennsylvania, so yeah.
Just a stone's throw, right?
Yeah. So, Gary, you were a minister for 27 years before becoming a world-class performance coach. What sparked that transition?
Well, actually, in 2017, I had a little bit of a burnout, and it was my third time. And so I figured, there's something wrong with me. There's a pattern here. And so I kind of took a deep dive inside of myself. It was either have a midlife crisis and go buy a Camaro, or kind of try and figure out what I'm doing wrong with my life, and figure out how I can straighten it out and align myself with my purpose and my calling and my personality and my identity. And so for me, a lot of that had to do with alignment. And it's interesting looking back. Like, I don't think we get to choose all the classrooms that we are in life. Like, sometimes we want to take a degree, but we don't get to choose the classes. And I feel like a lot of life was that way for me. And then I think in 2017, having a hard reset, and then just there were multiple, what I would call divine moments that just sort of shaped the direction of my life and where things shifted for me. And one of them was meeting Trevor Moawad, who was Russell Wilson's mental performance coach. Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks, starting quarterback at the time, and he was really influential in my life, and saw some potential in me and asked if we wanted to continue to meet after our initial meeting. And that was like, I was like a kid in a candy store, because at that time he was kind of like working on all cylinders, right? He was on ESPN. He was working with the Miami Dolphins in Alabama and a bunch of pro athletes. And so to have that kind of opportunity to spend some time with someone of that caliber was super encouraging to me. And while I had a lot of imposter syndrome, they thinking, could I do this? Even though I put 1,000 hours of study into sports psych, I think just having his affirmation that I was okay at this and that I should think about doing this for a living was kind of all that I needed, And sometimes unfortunately, I guess for me, sometimes we just need permission from people who are, that you respect. And somehow, for whatever reason, I needed that permission and to say, you're pretty good, you should go for this. And so I did. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I ended up starting on my own in 2019. And so I've been doing mental performance and leadership stuff ever since.
So how did your background in ministry shape the way you coach athletes and business leaders today?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, actually. Like, it's worth, I think, a really deep conversation, because when you're a minister, you don't have money to throw at people, and you have maybe some common causes that you can sort of rally around. But for the most part, what you're trying to do is bring the best out of people as a leader, and so I got pretty good at that, and not having to motivate by money, nor control or power or authority issues, but really just encouraging people through coaching them. And so I think I got pretty good at that. And then learning the mental performance world and sports psych, putting 1,000 hours of study helped wrap my head around it, because it's a little bit nebulous when you start out, because there's so much to know and there's so much to learn. And so I think just believing the best in people and believing that everyone's got more levels in them, I think, is a valuable piece of information that I've lived experientially. Like, when someone's in a really difficult situation, there are usually steps that they need to take. And so you get used to asking them, well, what steps would you like to take? Like, how can you coach yourself out of this? And I found that asking people questions was probably my greatest tool that I had. And so I kind of became a professional question asker. And I think that's really served me well with the mental performance stuff.
So you mentioned your first break into the performance world. How did you actually meet him? How did you and him connect?
Well, again one of those divine moments, but it was a divine moment, I think, that was initiated by a sense of, a sense of identity, which is really kind of a strange way to say it. But if I unpack it a little bit, I remember kind of getting new, I was new into the industry, and our local high school football team, who has a really good track record and reputation, I walked over to their field at spring practice and just kind of watched. And then one of the coaches probably thought I was a psycho or weirdo or something, and he came over and was just like, "Hey, what's up? How you doing, man?" And then he found out kind of what I was doing was just watching practice, and loves football. And he said, "Hey, let's meet for coffee sometime." So we ended up meeting for coffee, and he just happened to know Trevor Moad, and so he said, "Hey, would you like me to set you up with Trevor?" And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" So it was based out of that sense of identity. Like, I loved football, I love competition, I love being around competition, no matter what level that it is, and took an action step to explore what that might look like more in my life. And then that friendship blossomed, and that introduction to Trevor blossomed, and the rest is kind of history. Like, it's just like those little, you never know when those like pivotal moments are going to show up in your life, and that was just one of them. And I've been blessed to have many of those in my life. So it's been just a really fun ride the last 6 years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. The first 30, 25 years were pretty tough. That was a tough life to live. And the last six have been maybe the most joyful. So just because I feel more aligned, I think.
Awesome, awesome. So were there doubts or challenges in moving from the pulpit to the playing field and boardroom?
Yeah, it's interesting how, you know, being behind a pulpit, and it's really interesting because I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people think that pastors, well, at least I don't know about so much anymore, but back in the day, I used to think, well, pastors are perfect, and they have all the answers and whatever. And I never believed that about myself. That was not part of my modus operandi. But you can be a little bit self-deprecating as someone who's been on the stage 1,000 times. Like, people think they put you on a pedestal, and you're constantly taking yourself off that pedestal. And so we would want to be approachable and say that we make mistakes like everybody else. And so there's a certain level of self-deprecation that happens when you're a pastor behind a pulpit. And it's really interesting that that doesn't carry over to the boardroom, nor does it carry over to the locker room. And so I had to learn the hard way. There were a couple events that I did, speaking engagements that I had, that I kind of carried over that pastor side of me. And I think I confused everyone because I was self-deprecating and just kind of like, "Oh shucks, I'm just like everybody else." And I think I confused everyone that was there. They're like looking at me strange and like didn't quite understand. And then I went home that night, and my wife Molly said to me, like, "Well, how did it go?" And I'm like, "I don't know. That didn't go very well. Like, I'm not sure what happened. And then I had day two. I went back day two, kind of putting on a completely different persona. And I thought, I got to learn to speak in front of this other crowd. Like, I got to figure this out, because that didn't work. And I came in, just sort of ultra confident, sure of myself, not self-deprecating, sharing victories, and somehow that really resonated in a way that I hadn't expected. And I was like, "Oh, this is how you do this." So yeah, it really it was really interesting. So I feel like I have the flexibility to go either way. For the most part, I feel like I'm a pretty humble guy. But on the other hand, I think you have to be ultra confident in yourself and what you teach. And we're, as mental performance coaches, we're constantly stress testing the theories that we have and the tactics that we have. And so I kind of feel like I'm the big mental performance experiment. And if it can work for me in multiple scenarios, in different situations, at different times, with varying levels of importance, then yeah, maybe it really does work in most situations. Not in all, but in most. So yeah, you just kind of learn as you go.
What early experiences taught you that mindset can make or break success?
Mm. Yeah, like when I was younger, I'm talking like 7 or 8 years old. I know it's really interesting to say that it happened that early, but it did for me. And I was a kid, and I delivered the newspaper, and I'm from Canada, so I'm out in the middle of nowhere, like cold Canada, not
Mm.
close to the border. I'm talking like cold Canada, and I had three older brothers and a younger brother, so there were five boys in our family. And my older brothers had paper routes, and so as a young Chupik, we would go help our brothers deliver the newspaper, and it didn't matter if it was like minus 25 or whether it was just hovering around 0 or 32. We had to go deliver the newspaper. That's what we were supposed to do. And so it didn't matter how cold it was. And I remember my eyelashes freezing together. That's how cold it was. Like you literally had to pick the ice off of your eyelashes. And so there was something about learning endurance and perseverance. Like there's no way out of this. I can't imagine putting the newspaper, in a mailbox. I had to go do it, and I think that was really helpful. And it was back in the day too when you had to like go door to door and collect the money that people owed you for the newspaper. So I had to learn how to knock on doors. When I was really young, even though I really didn't know anybody or I didn't know that family, and I just had to ask for my $1.75, for 2 weeks of newspapers, and it was rather surprising. So I just learned a lot of stuff at a young age.
Awesome. If you look back, was there a defining stuck moment in your life that pushed you towards this path?
Um, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Um, if you look back, was there a defining stuck moment in your life that pushed you toward this path?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's kind of like the space between the notes and music, right? And there are those moments where you do get stuck and you kind of wonder what your next steps are. There were multiple I can look back over the course of many years, but one of them was I had a job and I was offered another job, a national job, and so when I quit my current job and to take this new job, the new job said, "Oops, sorry, the job's not available." And I was just like, "Oh, wait a minute! I just had quit my previous job, and here I am, jobless for the first time in my life." And so there was some space that was created for me to kind of figure out what my next steps were. And so I've come to appreciate those spaces in between the notes, and they're a valuable part of life. And I don't think that they're bad. I don't think that they're a misstep. I think that they really can be useful and helpful to ask ourselves a different set of questions than we might normally ask ourselves.
Absolutely. You've worked with NFL players, Olympians, and CEOs. What do they all have in common when it comes to mental performance?
Yeah, that's such a good question. The most obvious one that I can think of is that they have a system of routines that and structure that really aid in their progress as athletes. And like for example, like if you take the average NFL player who come Monday morning, they're getting up at the same time, they're going to the facility at the same time, the meetings are at the same time, the practices at the same time, the lunches at the same time. The positional meetings are at the same time. The group practice or the whole team practice is at the same time, and then dinner is at the same time, and then they get released. There's dinner there, or they can go home. But there's so much rhythm in their life, and it's quite simplistic. It's not very complicated. And I think a lot of athletes, once they are done with athletics, they're a little lost because there was all that structure there for them, and now they don't have that structure. And I think, but to the point of your question, what do they have in common? They have a simplistic life that they're able to perfect things in a way that really projects their career forward. And I think there's a lot of value to that because I think we are more likely to put our keys in all sorts of different doors, door locks. And we're just like, well, maybe this will work, or maybe that will work, or maybe this will work. We're kind of looking for that quick fix. Whereas I think just about anybody who is elite at what they do, let's say, including a musician, yeah, they have pretty simple lives. If you want to be elite at that level, you're not living a very well-rounded life. You just aren't. And to sort of accept that, and say, well, wait a minute, I wonder if that's one of the ingredients of success. It's really true. It probably is. The repetition of doing something over and over and over again makes you so good at something that it's hard not to be good at it. So I think that would be a sort of a common theme for a lot of professional athletes.
Hmm. Can you walk us through one of your signature methods for unlocking peak performance?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones that produces pretty immediate results is a system that I created called CAPE, CAPE. And let's use a baseball player, for example. It doesn't matter the position, doesn't matter if he's a batter or the pitcher or a fielder or base runner. It's all basically the same thing. So the acronym CAPE stands for C stands for control. So the first thing you need to do is control yourself. It's take that universal sign to relax and to calm down. And the reason why that's important is because you can lower your cortisol levels. And the hormone cortisol is a neural inhibitor, so it prevents you from thinking really well. And so being calm is can be really really helpful. Alert, yes, but also quite calm. So it's kind of so the first one is to control yourself. You'll see athletes take that deep sigh. They'll do nasal breathing. They'll sort of like gather themselves once again and just kind of just reset. So it's control is the first one. A stands for assess. So it's assess the situation. So if you're a pitcher, you're assessing all types of things. You're assessing the pitch count. You're assessing where the runners are, if there are any on base, the wind, the call from the coach. There's just so many things that you are assessing, and your brain does it lightning fast. So you might only spend 2 or 3 seconds assessing, and that's pretty much it. Then the P stands for make a plan. So you want to make your plan and be ready that what's going to happen if the ball comes to me. What position do I need to be in if the ball goes somewhere else? Like you are literally making plans in your own head. And then finally, E stands for execute, which has 3 parts: trust your plan that you just made, trust your training, and trust your instincts. And playing instinctually is pretty crucial to success because every great athlete or every elite athlete, they have to play instinctually. They can't solely trust on trust their training. They can't solely trust their plan, but they do have to play instinctually. So trust your plan, trust your training, trust your instincts, and that's CAPE.
Mm. So what role does pressure and failure play in building champions?
Say it again. I'm sorry.
What role does pressure and failure play in building? And I don't really say it's failure because I look at it more as like you said, it's a learning experience and stuff. So yeah, so that would be my question.
Yeah, pressure certainly brings the best out of us. Like when there's a little bit of pressure on you, that's usually a really good thing because it allows you to learn how much to trust yourself. So if you start a little bit smaller with things that are possibly not as important, that can be a great place to start, and then slowly increasing those high pressure moments. And when you get comfortable with them, then they can be really valuable as different parts of life sort of present those high pressure moments to you. And so you're able, because you're familiar with high pressure environments, to be able to navigate them well. So pressure in our world, we say pressure is a privilege because not everyone gets to be in that position where you are to have the pressure. In other words, if you were never playing in a playoff game, if you were never playing in a championship game, if you were never putting for $25,000 or 50 or $100,000 or more, like you wouldn't know how to react in those moments. And so the pressure is actually really healthy. There are different ways to mitigate the pressure. You can be a little bit more stressed and more anxious about it, or you can allow the adrenaline to kick in. And sometimes that will give you a heightened sense of your surroundings or your performance or your body movement, your physiology, what you want to see, what you want to accomplish. So it can be actually really helpful. The downside is if you don't learn how to handle that pressure and reframe it in a way that's beneficial to you, and then it could release more cortisol, and you can become more anxious in your presentation and what you're trying to accomplish. So it really has a lot to do with the way that you're perceiving the high pressure moment, and if you can learn to figure that out, it can be very very beneficial. So it's changing our relationship to pressure. Failure, on the other hand, is about reframing failure. Everybody fails, and if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So if we can learn to fail in a way that's profitable for us, then we can change our relationship to failure. So it's failure is actually a very healthy thing, and it's a very good teacher if we let it be.
So you've been the chaplain for the Seattle Thunderbirds. How does spirituality intersect with performance coaching?
Yeah. So in my view, and I know it's not very common, but in my view, we have four parts to us. So I believe in a quadratic view of the human. We are body, mind, soul, and spirit. And so if we only train three of those four, it's like sending an athlete onto a field with only three out of four limbs. Hard to compete. But if we can tap into that spiritual side of us, then that's a pretty good reservoir or lake that we can get some water in, and it can be very helpful to us. So the question is how do you utilize that spirituality? Well, there's multiple ways, but I think one of the biggest questions is to say, well, why am I here? Like, why am I playing the sport? Why does it matter? And if we can learn to channel that and use it to our advantage, then that's a pretty powerful thing. I mean, for example, there are going to be a lot of people who aren't, let's say, spiritual, but everybody does ask themselves the existential question, why am I here? And whether that's a spiritual question or an existential question, it really doesn't matter. The question is like, do you understand what your role can be in this world? And then once you understand your role and your purpose and your calling and your assignments and your identity and your personal philosophy and all of those things, once you have a clear understanding of those things and you align all of them, you become pretty formidable. Like you're like I say I like to create hard to beat athletes. And when you can align all those things in your life, you become a hard to beat athlete because you're not leaving any rock unturned in your life, including your spirituality.
So we've mentioned athletes, but you don't only just work with athletes. You help high level leaders and first responders like the FBI and firefighters manage stress and decision making under pressure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how much mental performance matters in the other spheres of life, like and not just sports. Like in business, think about it. I mean, what does it take to be an elite athlete? It might take, someone might say it takes great self talk and positivity and coachability and, emotional regulation. I mean, there's so many things. But what does it take to be elite at business? Emotional regulation, self-talk. I mean, so many of the same reframing failure. I mean, there's so many commonalities between the two. The environments are maybe different, but they're so alike. And in fact, in some ways, athletes have it better than business people because athletes have scheduled time off they take to recover. Whereas people in business, oftentimes, man, they're going 6 days a week or, 60 hours a week or 70 hours, and they're not spending enough time recovering it because they don't think it's important enough to do that. And yet, when we get 6 hours sleep as opposed to 8 hours sleep, it's a significant drop off in our performance. And so I think one of the things that people in business can really learn from athletes is the rhythm of rest and Sabbath.
Awesome. How is mental performance coaching evolving in sports and business today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because mental performance is relatively new. I mean, there have been strands of it through for thousands of years with Stoicism and other disciplines, but really the first book that I'm aware of that was like sort of hit the big time was 1972 by a guy named Timothy Galloway who wrote a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and he kind of put mental performance on the map. And did it, did it exist before that? I'm sure. Like I said, in probably different strands, but it sort of all came together in a solid tight rope in 1972. But I mean, if you were to, if you were to search for mental performance and sports psychology programs 30 years ago, you probably wouldn't find one. It didn't. It actually didn't exist. It's only in the last probably 15 years where you would find any sports psychology programs, and sports psychology. It's a little bit of a misnomer as well because there's really like you can get a sports psych degree, but if you were actually to become a psychologist or a sports psychologist, let's say, you'd have to actually become a psychologist first. And so that education is different than, let's say, a sports psychologist, where people might call themselves a performance psychologist or a sports psychologist. But in reality, you're a psychologist who spends maybe 10 or 15% of your education actually studying performance psychology. So it doesn't go tremendously deep. Um, and so I think what's happened in the last maybe 10 years or 15 years, obviously, you've seen a ton more publicity. You've seen a ton more people entering the field calling themselves mindset coaches, or it's a little bit of the wild west where people are calling themselves all sorts of things. But So it's gotten a little nebulous. It's gotten a little kind of like it's gotten a little wrangly in many ways. But as a mental performance coach, I really do appreciate the sports psych side of it a lot, and the performance psychology piece. I value that a lot. And then having coached and counseled and lots of other sort of, like in the chaplaincy world, you've done a lot of that with thousands and thousands of people. You kind of learn a thing or two over time. And but I think it's changed. In some ways it's been really great, in other ways it's not been helpful. Like, for example, I saw someone else call themselves a performance coach, and I was like, so what do you do? Like, you're a performance coach, what do you do? And well, I have children with autism. I'm like, oh, well, that's an interesting way to refer to yourself, as a performance coach. And so I just think it sounds good. But I don't know how much substance there is behind some of that stuff. So I think it's a little bit of the Wild West right now.
So what do you see as the next frontier in neuroscience and performance psychology?
Yeah, it's probably wearable tech would be my guess. There's so much going on with AI and its ability to accumulate just nodes of information. So it seems as if the direction is becoming more technical. And I think there's a good part of that. There's definitely a good portion of the industry that's tapping into that as well. But there's some caution with that too. Like, there's some things that wearable tech can't tell you, and or the statistics can't tell you, and you can try and figure them out. Like, I have a mental performance assessment that I have, and so I'm trying to figure out how to help the people that I work with a little bit quicker. But I think it's moving in the direction of analytics, and there's pros and cons to it for sure.
How can everyday people apply elite athlete tools to their own careers and families?
Yeah, it's super fascinating. This morning I just taught at a college here in the Seattle area, and we were just talking about that this morning, how I can teach almost every aspect of mental performance, and I can say, so how might this apply, or how could you apply this to the different domains of your life? And at just about every turn, no matter what subject I was talking about in mental performance and sports psych, they're like, oh yeah, I could see where this would be helpful in studying. Oh, I could see how this would be helpful in relationships. I could see how this would be helpful in finding a good job, like, and my performance at work. It's like almost to a T, everything that you learn in mental performance can be translated into the different domains of a person's life. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And so, if in our world we say that you can train three things, you can train your mind, you can train your body, and you can train your craft. And we don't spend enough time training our mind for whatever it is that we're doing. We'll train our craft, we'll get skill training and skill building, and we'll go to workshops and kind of we'll go to school and get educated. We train our bodies in obvious ways, but we don't really know how to train our mind. And I think there are some significant sequential things that we can do to get our mind stronger. Just like if you go to the gym and you don't start doing, over the head, lifts just in your first time to the gym. There's a lot of things to learn and build up to. And I think in the same way, a lot of people think that they can just sort of grab a mental performance weight and become excellent at it. It usually is not quite that simple, because there is a sequence to it. However, I think there's a lot of value in starting out with the fundamentals and then working your way to the more challenging things. And it's not written in Greek. It's not written in Russian. Like, we can learn this. But it's helpful if you work with someone who understands the sequences, because it's kind of like baking a cake. You can have all the right ingredients, but if you don't sequence it properly, you're not getting a cake. And you can put flour and cocoa in the oven at 325 and pull it out 40 minutes later and throw an egg and milk on top. Well, you're getting maybe a lava cake or something. I'm not sure what you're getting, but you're really not getting the intended outcome. And I think in the same way, when it comes to mental performance, it's like, how do we design a program so that we get the intended results from our clients?
If someone is listening today takes just one mental performance principle from you, what should it be?
Well, I think there's a few. I think the CAPE is a really helpful method. Like, no matter what craft you're in, like if I'm working with law enforcement or FBI or an athlete, doing the CAPE, control, assess, plan, and execute, I think that's really helpful. But I would say that the most helpful thing I know that I use on a daily basis is the reset and neutral thinking. So it's kind of like a two-part sequence. So is learning how to reset yourself. And sort of the moral of the story is reset as often as you can throughout your day. Like, hit that power button on your computer, boot it down, and let it boot up again for your next conversation, your next task, then the next relationship that you're gonna sort of engage in that day with a friend or a neighbor. If you want to be at your best, learn to reset often so that you can be fully present in that situation or with that conversation with that person. And then it's going to neutral thinking, which is the part B, which is I don't have to be overly positive because that's not always helpful. And I don't have to be negative. That's definitely not helpful. But if I can remain neutral, then that really bodes well for me and the person I'm trying to help. So it becomes less self-conscious and becomes more task conscious.
So you're about to get the solo screen. What's next for you? More teams, books, speaking, or new ventures?
Yeah, that's that's always a challenge to figure out, and sort of the career path that I want to take. But I think right now it's about continuing to expand to more teams, more public speaking. I already do a lot of public speaking, but even more public speaking, and I speak at a lot of conferences and workshops and that kind of thing. So I think that's a big part of what I do, and then I'm also in conversation with multiple global companies about using my material worldwide. Yeah. So thank you for asking. My handle on social media on Instagram is Elite Mindset, and people can find me just by Googling my name, Gary Chupik, or Elite Mindset. And then also I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, I can be found lots of different places online for sure.
Full guest, I greatly appreciate your time. This has been great. Um, uh, Thank you. It was great. I enjoyed the conversation, man. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having the conversation. I appreciate the little bit different angle of the questions, which I think you did a fantastic job of, and drew out of me things that I don't normally talk about. So I really appreciate that a lot.
I appreciate that. I like. That's why I like. That's what I try to do. I don't. Cause I know you've probably done quite a few podcasts, and you probably get the same questions over and over. So I try to make sure I get some different questions in there and make it different and unique. But thank you, man. You've been a great guest. I greatly appreciate the time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Well, you got an A+ on that one, so you by far passed the test on the creativity of the questions.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. But don't leave just yet because we're going to chat a little bit off the air. But thank you once again. You've been such a wonderful guest. I greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, all my best. Thank you very much.
Bye. All right, everybody. Another great episode. If Gary's words fired you up, don't let it stop here. Follow his work, explore his coaching, and start applying the mental tools that can change not just your performance, but your life. And if you know someone chasing excellence, whether it's in sports, business, or life, share this episode with them because greatness starts with mindset. Stay focused, stay relentless, stay wise. You know your boy Wise does it. Peace out.